Hey, it's Ryan with Upfit Supply, and in this video we're going to be assembling and installing a Holman Workbench in our RAM ProMaster, so let's get started. We're going to get started with a little bit of bench work, mainly assembling the shelf, applying any accessories to that shelf, and then we'll go into the van and install that later. So we're going to start with our lower shelving unit. This happens to be the 50-inch wide shelving unit, but there are other dimensions available. So here we're going to have our long 50-inch wide shelves, and we're going to have our end panels like this. Now in our ProMaster, we are going to be mounting this workbench over the wheel well, and so we need to make sure that we can clear that. So we need to go at least 16 inches to clear that wheel well with our bottom shelf. So if we go on this lower lance here, you can see inside the end panel here, these little tabs that stick out that the shelves actually sit on. We can't go on this lowest shelf lowest location here because it's only about 12 inches. And so we need to go up to here to get us that 16 inches of clearance. And the way that we're going to be putting these shelves on is simply going from bottom to top, and we're going to do some measurements along the way because we have a couple accessories we're going to be putting in this workbench as well. Now when assembling these shelves, they can be mounted in two orientations. You can mount them like this, so you have a flush surface on top, or you can mount them the other way so that you have kind of a little cradle that things can sit in and so forth. So it's really up to you how you want to do it. The only thing you need to take in consideration is the front side of the shelf has a welded in nut that's used for assembly, and that always needs to be pointing on the front side of the shelf. So if you're looking at the shelf from inside the van, this is going to be the front right here, or it's going to be like this. So there is a specific orientation from front to back, but you can flip it over to use flush or what I like to call cradled side. So on our bottom shelf, we're actually going to be using a cradle side so we can set some components in there. And on the ProMaster, we are going to have to go up to this second lance. So I'm going to go ahead and get that started right now. Our end panels on this lower shelving unit are not side specific, so they do not have weld nuts in the back of the end panel like some of them do on the larger shelves. So it doesn't really matter which side you use on this one, as long as you're consistent with your front and your back on the actual shelves. So pretty simple here, we're just sliding the shelf into that second to bottom lance, and then we can put in our first set of screws. And all you need for the front side is these Phillips head screws here. So we're gonna put these in now. So the next thing we want to account for is we're actually going to be putting some accessories on the shelf, namely a single sliding drawer where you basically convert one of these shelves into a full drawer that you can pull out. Nice little addition to have right beneath our workbench. We want that at the top most part of the shelf, so it'll be right under that workbench. So I just have the side slide portion from that kit right here. And I want to kind of get our measurement right here to figure out where this is going to be mounting so we can mount a shelf directly below that. And so I think we'll be okay putting a shelf right here as long as it's flush. And so we'll do that now. Now finally, I'll get our last shelf put on the top here. Now for securing the back, we do need to use some lock nuts along with those button head screws. And this is just a 7/16 inch nut along with those same button head screws. So that concludes the assembly portion of the lower part of the shelf. The next thing that we're actually gonna do is put in our shelf drawer right here on this upper location, and then we'll put our workbench top on top. So you can see we have our drawer here. This is going to be mounted to some slides that will go right here in this location right there. So the installation just involves mounting our two slides to the side of the shelving unit, and then there's a little divider that we can mount inside of that shelf that we're going to do first. So to put the divider in here, it's just these same two button head screws. You can put it, there's a few different locations you can put it on this shelf, and then putting in your two screws. Now mounting this into our shelving unit is almost like adding another shelf. We have these pre-threaded locations right here on the front of these brackets, which are going to go on the front side of the shelf. You've you've got 4 different locations you can go into, so depending on the height you want, you can go into those locations. Now, our back is kind of like a shelf, is not threaded or anything like that. You're kind of expected to use one of these screws to go into a threading location on the shelf, but this particular shelf does not have the pre-threaded or welded in nuts on the back, but they do give you plenty of extra lock nuts that you can use instead, so we're gonna go that route. Now, one thing we want to take in consideration when putting this drawer in is we want the top of this drawer to meet the bottom of this shelf, so we have a nice secure location. This has a lock on it, so we can latch it and keep things in here securely. So we want to make sure that this is mounted up against something on top to keep, you from being able to get into the drawer when it's shut. So we're gonna take this into account. This is a 6-inch tall shelf, so we just want to make sure that the bottom of our mounting plate here is 6 inches from the bottom to the bottom of here, and then we should have a nice secure location. One other thing to point out is that these are actually designed to slide into the side lances as well. You can see these little punches in the sheet metal there. Those are for sliding into those lances, so you get that additional support there as well. All right, so I had to do that a little bit out of frame so I could see what was going on here, but now we have our drawer in place. There's a little latch here to open that drawer. Slides in and out, nice secure location up against this here. If I really wanted to, I could mount this shelf, or maybe one lower, or maybe not even use it because, got a little bit of an awkward gap here, but might be able to slide in some wood or something in there as well, so we'll make use of that. So one of the final pieces for our assembly is going to be attach the workbench top to our shelf here, and I did make one mistake on this top shelf, is it does have to be flipped over the other way, so it's the flush surface on top for when mounting this, so I'm gonna flip that around real quick. On the back of the shelf, you're gonna make sure that you take out the 2 screws and bolts that are in these top locations, because we're gonna be using that for our backsplash. So basically, we're just going to take this backsplash, line it up with those holes, and then reattach them. Next, we're gonna lift our workbench into place on top of the unit, and it is pretty much an edge-to-edge flush fit right up against those edges. And then we actually drill into the bottom of this with the provided screws into some locations. We need 4 locations underneath there to drill into the wood. So we're gonna take these screws and we're actually gonna slide our drawer out and come from behind and find those 4 locations to screw into. Then we have one last screw included that we're gonna put into the back of the backsplash that goes into the wood right here. Now, one final piece of this installation before we get it in the van is we're going to take our little corner supports here, loosen up this screw, put these in place, and you can see we've got locations right here to rebolt those in. We're all set with the assembly now. Let's go ahead and get this put in the van. Okay, we've lifted this workbench into place. It is pretty heavy, so you're gonna need an additional set of hands. You wanna make sure that you can lift this and put it into place and not drag it or anything like that, because you're gonna scratch up your floor, scratch up the shelf, or you might bend a leg or something like that. So just make sure that you're lifting this into place. Now I kind of have this generally where I want it. I want this as close to the wall as possible, so I'm gonna slide it in just a little bit, and then I'm gonna take some marks on where I'm gonna need to drill some holes for my feet and for my wall brackets. Now, if you're installing multiple shelving units in here, we're actually gonna be doing another 42-inch shelf this way, and then an 18-inch cabinet to the right of that. So we measured everything out, make sure we have plenty of space against the wall to be able to mount this. And so this is a good spot for us here on the ProMaster. I think, it may be wrong, but there is one of these wall tie-down locations in the rear there that we might be able to utilize for one of our side brackets. That's just one less hole and plus nut that we have to put in. But our floor, we're gonna have to put a hole in this floor and then do a plus nut in the sheet metal below that. You wanna make sure that you use a spacer to get through that floor so you're not putting the weight of this on the floor, because this is a composite floor and they do kind of change with the temperature, and you wanna make sure that you're not gonna run into any issues there. Make sure that you use some spacing when attaching the feet there. Now, the lower shelving unit is what is going to come with the attachment brackets, and you get 2 of them. like this that you're gonna use kind of on your mid mounting point. On the ProMaster, there's a rail that goes along kind of right here, and then there's another one up here. So obviously we're gonna tie into this rail, and then we're gonna tie into the floor, but just using these brackets to figure out the best location on where to attach. Another helpful tool for installing shelving is just going to be your level. Make sure that your uprights are nice and level with the ground and parallel to each other. Now you do have two options for mounting these side brackets. You can mount them outward like this, or you can mount them inward like this. It really is up to you. We are going to be putting in another shelving unit almost right next to this, so we're just going to take that into account with our bracket and make sure that we're not going to conflict with what we're going to be mounting that unit to. Okay, now that I have my locations marked on the wall and on the floor, I'm going to pull this away from the wall so that I can get in there and start putting in my plus nuts. Now to install the plus nuts, you're going to need some type of a tool. This is just kind of a generic plus nut installer tool. Holman also makes a little plus nut installer tool that you actually can use with a set of wrenches to basically compress this nut onto the sheet metal to give you a nice mounting location. Or if you're going to be doing a ton of these, you can get a tool like this, or they also make an air tool. Now, as you can see, we're installing over top of some liners from Legend Fleet. You do need to make some bigger holes in the liner. So number one, you can find the metal location. You're not going to mount the shelf to the liner. It's not strong enough for that. You need to go into the sheet metal and the rail behind it. And to really be able to set a plus nut in there, you need to make sure you have about an inch hole in there. Then you can also use a spacer to make sure that you have a good kind of metal on metal contact with your bracket that's going to give you the most secure mounting location with your shelving. Another thing I should mention is that it is recommended from Holman to have two connection points with the wall per bracket. So we're going to have one bracket here going into these two mounting locations right here. Then we'll go into the side of the shelf. You're gonna make sure that you have two locations. I tried to go up here, but we didn't have our crossbar member here. Luckily, that's just gonna be covered up by our bracket. So we'll go into these two locations right here. Now on my floor marks down here, I'm gonna be using a hole saw to go through the floor so that I can use a spacer so that this shelf is actually sitting on these spacers rather than on the floor so that this floor can float. And so just using a hole saw here. I don't have too much of the drill bit sticking through because I'm going to come through with my drill stop on there to drill the hole for the plus nut. Now I'm using a 3/8 inch drill bit on this, which is a little bit smaller than the plus nut before it's compressed. So it's fine for getting the plus nuts through, but you do have to use a little bit of effort to get those plus nuts into the holes. So we're going to start by mounting to the floor. That way we can make sure that these are nice and aligned before we go ahead and do our side wall brackets. So my last step here, I have my bracket attached to the wall here. The same thing in the back there. We're attached to the floor. Got my spacers, so this is sitting on the spacer on the floor and not on this actual composite floor here. Now, next step is to attach these together, but I'm going to be putting a shelf right next to this, and I may go through both shelves into this bracket to secure it together. And so I'm going to do that before attaching to this shelf. That just about does it for the installation of this workbench in our ProMaster. The installation is going to vary, obviously, from vehicle to vehicle, but the assembly is going to be the same. Obviously, you're buying this shelf separate, this workbench separate, and this drawer separate. So these are actually three different parts that you need to order if you're looking for this. Now, if you're looking for this shelf, the workbench top, this drawer, or any other equipment to get your van ready for work, be sure to check us out at upfitsupply.com. And my name is Ryan, and have a good one.